Nobody expects the waitress at a Tuesday lunch shift to speak fluent Korean, let alone the exact dialect your dead grandmother used to sing lullabies in. But that's exactly what happened when Shanice opened her mouth, and honestly, everything that came after was just dominoes falling in the weirdest possible direction. Want to know how a linguistics major ends up changing a crime family's entire trajectory? Keep watching. Shanice Waller had exactly $50 in her checking account and a bachelor's degree in East Asian languages that everyone told her was useless. The restaurant job at Sunlight Garden was supposed to be temporary, just until she figured out what actual career path didn't require selling her soul or moving back to her mom's house in Savannah. She'd been there 8 months. The temporary thing wasn't really working out. Table 12 needs water, her manager called out, barely looking up from his phone. Shanice grabbed the pitcher, smoothing down her black apron. Table 12 was the private room, which meant big money and bigger attitudes. She'd served in there exactly 3 times, and each time the tips were either ridiculously good or insultingly bad. No middle ground with rich people, apparently. She pushed through the door with her professional smile ready. The room went quiet the second she entered. Not the normal kind of quiet where people pause their conversation, the kind where something important was clearly happening and she just walked into it. Great. Perfect timing as always. An elderly Korean woman sat at the head of the table, probably mid-70s, wearing a hanbok that looked like it cost more than Shanice's entire education. Around her sat 7 people in dark suits, all of them staring at Shanice like she'd just sprouted a second head. At the woman's right sat a man who made Shanice's hand wobble just slightly on the water pitcher. Not because he was intimidating, though he absolutely was, but because he was possibly the most striking person she'd ever seen in real life. Korean, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and eyes that tracked her movement like a hawk watching a field mouse. Water. Shanice asked, keeping her voice steady. The elderly woman looked at her, and something flickered in her expression. Sadness, maybe. The deep kind that lives in people's bones.
할머니께서 물을 드시겠어요?
Shanice asked gently, the JEOLLA dialect rolling off her tongue like she'd never stopped using it. Would grandmother like some water? The glass in someone's hand actually hit the table. The sharp-featured man stood up, so fast his chair scraped. Every single person in that room froze like someone had paused a video. The elderly woman's eyes went wide, then filled with tears. 어머니, she whispered. My goodness. Shanice realized, probably too late, that she'd made some kind of massive mistake. The JEOLLA dialect wasn't something you just casually knew. It was specific, regional, and, according to her linguistics professor, dying out even in Korea. She'd learned it because her research partner in grad school had been from JEOLLA province, and they'd spent 2 years working on a preservation project together. She'd gotten so used to switching dialects that sometimes she forgot other people found it weird. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Shanice started in English, but the woman held up a hand.
앉으세요. 더 우먼 세대 소프트리. Sit down.
Yaminim, she's just the waitress, the sharp-featured man said in Korean, his voice tight with something Shanice couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe. Or fear.
앉으라고 했어.
I said sit down. It wasn't a request anymore. Shanice glanced at her manager through the window. He was still on his phone. She was probably getting fired for this, whatever this was, but the old woman's face had shifted into something that made Shanice's chest hurt. That look of someone seeing a ghost they'd loved. She sat. What's your name, child? The woman asked in Korean, still in that JEOLLA dialect. Shanice Waller. She replied in the same dialect. I studied Korean linguistics at university. My research partner taught me JEOLLA speech patterns. I'm sorry if I offended you. Offended? The woman laughed, but it came out wet. Child, my mother spoke exactly like you just did. She died 40 years ago, and I haven't heard those words, that exact sound, since the day we buried her.
Oh.
Oh no. I'm so sorry, Shanice whispered. Don't be. The woman reached across the table and took Shanice's hand. Her fingers were small and warm and covered in rings that I'm pretty sure were overly expensive. You just gave me the most precious gift anyone's given me in decades. What's your real story? Nobody learns JEOLLA dialect by accident. So Shanice told her about the linguistics program, about her research partner Yoonji, who'd gone back to Gwangju after graduation, about the preservation project that had consumed her life for 2 years, about how she could speak 4 Korean dialects plus formal Seoul speech, read classical Chinese, and recite poetry from the Goryeo dynasty, but apparently none of that translated into actual job prospects. Hence the waitressing. Shanice finished, acutely aware that everyone else at the table was still staring at her like she'd performed a magic trick. The old woman squeezed her hand. "My name is Yoon Yoon-suk. This is my son, Yoon Dae-young." She gestured to the sharp-featured man, who was now looking at Shanice with an expression she couldn't read at all. "We own several businesses in the city." Several businesses was probably code for something, based on how uncomfortable everyone looked, but Shanice just nodded. "Nice to meet you properly," she said. "How would you like a different job?" Yoon-suk asked. "I need someone to help me with a project. Translation work, cultural consultation. Someone who understands the old ways of speaking." Shanice blinked. What? "She's offering you a job," Dae-young said in English, his accent barely noticeable. His voice was deep and even and did weird things to Shanice's pulse. "My mother doesn't make offers she doesn't mean." "But you don't even know me," Shanice protested. Yoon-suk smiled. "I know you learned a dying dialect because you cared about preserving it. I know you spoke to an old woman with respect and gentleness. I know my mother would have liked you. That's enough." "What kind of project?" Shanice asked carefully, because this felt surreal and slightly dangerous and definitely too good to be true. "I'm writing my memoirs," Yoon-suk said, "in JEOLLA dialect. For my grandchildren so they know where they came from. I need someone who can help me make sure the words are right. Someone who understands not just the language, but the heart of it." It sounded legitimate. It probably wasn't, based on the general vibe of everyone in dark suits, but Shanice's bank account had $47 and her student loans were laughing at her from their automated payment reminders. "When would I start?" Shanice asked. Yoon-suk's smile widened. "How about right now? Stay. Eat with us. We'll discuss terms." Dae-young made a sound that might have been a protest, but his mother silenced him with a look. And that's how Shanice Washington ended up eating bulgogi with what she'd learn later was one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast, all because she'd remembered the exact way her research partner's grandmother used to say, "Would you like some water?" The universe had a weird sense of humor sometimes. The next 3 weeks were probably the strangest of Shanice's entire life, and she'd once accidentally walked into a K-pop flash mob while trying to find a bathroom, so the bar was already pretty high. Yoon-suk's project turned out to be exactly what she'd said, which was somehow more surprising than if it had been a front for something illegal. They met 4 times a week in Yoon-suk's study, a room filled with books in 3 languages and photographs spanning 7 decades. Shanice would sit across from her with a laptop and recording equipment, and Yoon-suk would talk. She talked about growing up in JEOLLA province during the war, about immigrating to America with nothing but a suitcase and her mother's recipes, about meeting her husband, about building a life from dirt and determination. Her Korean was beautiful and archaic and exactly the kind of thing Shanice had spent years studying, except now it was alive, sitting across from her in a tiny woman with sharp eyes and soft hands. "You're good at this," Yoon-suk said one afternoon, watching Shanice transcribe a particularly tricky passage about traditional kimchi making. "I love it," Shanice admitted. "This is what I went to school for. Preserving stories like this." "Then why were you serving water?" Shanice laughed, but it came out bitter. "Because nobody wants to pay someone to preserve dying dialects. The grants dried up, the academic positions want PhDs, and every heritage language job wanted someone who was actually Korean. I'm great at the language, but apparently I don't look the part." Yoon-suk was quiet for a long moment. "People are foolish," she finally said. "Language doesn't care what color your skin is. Try telling that to hiring committees. I'm telling it to you instead. You have a gift. Don't let small-minded people make you forget that." Shanice had to look away because her eyes were doing something embarrassing. The weird part, though, wasn't the job. The weird part was Dae-young. He was always around. Not hovering, exactly, but present. He'd bring his mother tea during their sessions. He'd sit in the corner reading reports while they worked. Once, when Shanice stumbled over a particularly complex grammar point, he'd corrected her pronunciation so casually that she nearly dropped her pen. "You speak JEOLLA dialect?" she'd asked, surprised. "My grandmother taught me," he'd said, not looking up from his papers. "Though not as well as you, apparently." It was possibly the strangest compliment she'd ever received. The thing about Dae-young was that he was clearly dangerous. Not in an obvious way, but in the way he moved, the way people reacted to him. His business meetings involved men in dark suits who called him Sajangnam and looked like they could bench press a truck. Shanice wasn't stupid. She knew what this family probably was. But he was also weirdly gentle. He'd noticed she was left-handed and switched the placement of her teacup without being asked. When she'd mentioned missing good Southern food, a container of what had to be professionally made fried chicken appeared in the kitchen with a note that said, "From the restaurant downtown." He'd driven her home twice when it rained, in a car that was probably worth more than her entire apartment building, and both times he'd waited until she was safely inside before leaving. It was confusing. "You know he's interested in you, right?" Yoon-suk said one day, completely out of nowhere. Shanice nearly choked on her tea.
What? No.
He's being polite. Yoon-suk gave her a look that suggested Shanice might be the most oblivious person alive. "My son doesn't do polite. He does necessary. You, apparently, are necessary. For your project. Keep telling yourself that, dear." But things got complicated the following Tuesday, when Shanice arrived for their usual session and found Yoon-suk looking troubled. "What's wrong?" Shanice asked immediately. Yoon-suk sighed. "There's a situation with some business partners. Old grudges, old debts. It's going to require my son's attention for the next few weeks, which means..." She hesitated. "Things might get tense around here. If you want to take a break from the project, I'd understand." "Is it dangerous?" Shanice asked carefully. "Not for you. We'd never let anything happen to you. But it might be uncomfortable." Shanice thought about her apartment, her loans, the way Yoon-suk's stories made her feel like her degree had actually meant something. "I'd like to keep working, if that's okay." Yoon-suk's expression softened. "You're braver than you think." That evening, Dae-young caught Shanice on her way out. "My mother told you about the situation," he said. It wasn't a question. She mentioned something, yeah. He studied her for a long moment. "You should know that people might start watching this house. Following our associates. It's not personal, just business complications, but if anyone approaches you or makes you uncomfortable, you call me immediately." He handed her a business card with a single phone number on it. "I'm sure I'll be fine." Shanice. The way he said her name made her stomach flip. "Please, just take the number." She took it. "Good." He seemed to relax slightly. "And, maybe, don't walk home alone for a while. I'll arrange a driver." "That's really not necessary?" "It is. To me." There was something in his eyes that made Shanice forget whatever protest she'd been forming. Something intense and genuine, and maybe a little bit scared. "Okay," she agreed quietly. "A driver's fine." His shoulders dropped like he'd been bracing for an argument. "Thank you." The situation Yoon-suk had mentioned turned out to be a rival family trying to muscle in on some territory dispute. Shanice picked up pieces from overheard conversations and the general tension that settled over the house like fog. Men in suits came and went at odd hours. Dae-young looked increasingly tired, but he still brought his mother tea during their sessions. Still corrected Shanice's pronunciation when she asked. Still made sure she got home safely every single night. 3 weeks into the situation, Shanice was working late on a transcription when raised voices echoed from down the hall. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear enough. Argument. Serious one. She probably should have kept working. Should have put in headphones and minded her business. Instead, she found herself walking toward the sound, because one of those voices was Dae-young, and he sounded more upset than she'd ever heard him. "Can't keep pretending this life is sustainable," he was saying in Korean. "Yeonam deserves peace. We all do. Peace." Another man's voice, older. You want to go legitimate? With the Huang family breathing down our necks? They'll see it as weakness. Then let them. I'm tired of this. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of. He cut himself off. Shanice had backed up 3 steps, ready to flee back to the study, when a floorboard creaked under her foot. The conversation stopped immediately. Dae-young appeared in the doorway, and for just a second, Shanice saw something raw in his expression before he smoothed it away. Shanice, he said carefully. You should go home. It's late. I was just finishing up.
Please.
His voice was gentle but firm. Go home. Driver's waiting. She went, but lying in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. About wanting peace. About being tired. About this whole complicated, dangerous life he was apparently trying to find a way out of. And she definitely couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her in that doorway, like she was somehow part of whatever equation he was trying to solve. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Did you get home safely? She stared at the text for a full minute before responding.
Yes.
Is everything okay? It will be. Sleep well, Shanice. She saved the number under Dae-young and tried to convince herself that the flutter in her chest was just indigestion from the Thai food she'd had for dinner. It was definitely not indigestion. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Shanice was helping Yoon-suk work through a section about traditional wedding ceremonies when shouting erupted from the front entrance. Not arguing this time, actual shouting, the kind that made Yoon-suk's face go tight. Stay here, she ordered, standing up. What's happening? Just business. Stay in this room. Lock the door after I leave, and don't open it for anyone except me or Dae-young. Then she was gone, moving faster than Shanice had ever seen her move. Shanice locked the door with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. Should she call someone? The police? Dae-young? Nobody? A crash from somewhere in the house made the decision for her. She pulled up Dae-young's number and hit call. He answered before the first ring finished. Are you safe? I'm locked in your mother's study. She told me to stay here. What's going on? The Huang family decided to make a statement. I'm 10 minutes away. Do not open that door for anyone. I don't care what they say. Dae-young. Promise me, Shanice. I promise. Good. I'll be there soon. The line went dead. The next 8 minutes were possibly the longest of Shanice's life. She could hear voices, movement, something that might have been furniture being knocked over. Her heart was doing gymnastics in her chest, and she'd backed herself into the far corner of the room, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Then silence. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Shanice? Dae-young's voice through the door. It's me. You can open up. She fumbled with the lock and pulled the door open. Dae-young stood there looking completely composed except for his tie being slightly loosened. Behind him, Yoon-suk was directing several men in cleaning up what looked like a thoroughly destroyed vase. Are you hurt? He stepped into the room, checking her over like she might be hiding injuries.
I've fine.
I was in here the whole time. What happened? A disagreement that's now been resolved. His jaw was tight. This is exactly why I didn't want you here during all this. Then maybe you should have told me the truth from the beginning. Shanice shot back, fear translating into anger. About what your family actually does. About why random people might break into the house. Would you have taken the job if I had? I don't know. But at least I would have been able to make an informed choice instead of finding out when people start yelling in the hallway. Yoon-suk appeared in the doorway. She has a point, dear. Dae-young ran a hand through his hair, the first time Shanice had seen him look genuinely flustered. I was trying to protect you. By lying? By keeping you separate from the parts of my life that are dangerous and complicated and... He stopped, something crossing his face. This was a mistake. I'll have someone drive you home. We'll pay you for the full month and arrange for you to work with my mother remotely if she still wants to continue the project. Excuse me? Shanice felt her temper spike. You don't get to just dismiss me like that. I'm not dismissing you. I'm keeping you safe. I'm a grown woman who can make my own decisions about safety. Thank you very much. Not when those decisions could get you hurt. That's not your call to make. They were nearly nose to nose now, both breathing hard, and Yoon-suk was watching them with barely concealed amusement. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met, Dae-young said, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. Right back at you, Shanice replied. Something shifted in his expression. I can't. You don't understand what it would do to me if something happened to you because of my family's business.
Oh.
Dae-young, Yoon-suk said softly. Maybe you should tell her the truth instead of trying to protect her from your feelings. He shot his mother a look that could have melted steel, but Yoon-suk just smiled serenely. What truth? Shanice asked, her anger deflating into confusion. Dae-young was quiet for a long moment. The truth is that you walked into my mother's life at exactly the moment she needed you most. And somewhere in the last month, you also walked into mine, and I don't know what to do about that because my life is complicated and dangerous, and you deserve so much better than what I can offer. Shanice's brain short-circuited slightly. That's not. You can't just. I'm trying to be honest, he said quietly. You asked for truth. I'm going to check on the cleaning crew, Yoon-suk announced, completely unsubtle. You two work this out like adults. She disappeared down the hallway. Shanice stared at Dae-young. He stared back. So let me get this straight, Shanice finally said. You have feelings. For me. Apparently obvious feelings, according to my mother. And instead of, I don't know, maybe asking me on a date like a normal person, you decided to push me away for my own protection. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. Because it is ridiculous. Shanice wanted to laugh and cry and maybe shake him. Did it occur to you that maybe I should get a say in what risks I'm willing to take? You don't understand what you'd be getting into. Then explain it to me. Stop making decisions for me and actually talk to me like I have a functioning brain. Dae-young looked at her for a long moment, then slowly sat down on the couch like his legs had stopped working. My family were not legitimate business people. You've probably figured that out by now. We handle things that exist in gray areas. Protection, mediation, imports, and exports that don't always go through proper channels. It's what my grandfather started, what my father built, and what I inherited. Shanice sat down next to him, careful to leave space between them. Okay. But I hate it, he continued. I've hated it for years. The violence, the constant looking over your shoulder, the way it touches everything good in your life and makes it complicated. I've been trying to transition us toward legitimate business for the last 2 years. Some of our associates aren't happy about it. Hence the Huang family situation. Hence people breaking into your house.
Yeah.
He rubbed his face. And then you showed up, speaking my grandmother's dialect to my mother, making her smile in a way I haven't seen since my father died. And you were kind and smart and genuine, and every time you laughed at something I said, I felt like maybe there was a version of my life that didn't have to be so heavy all the time. Shanice's throat felt tight. Dae-young. But I can't ask you to be part of this mess. It's not fair to you. What if I want to be part of it anyway? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression was so vulnerable it made her chest ache. Why would you want that? Because. Shanice took a breath. Because your mother is the smartest, funniest person I've met in years, and working with her makes me feel like my degree actually meant something. Because you bring me tea the way I like it without asking. Because you notice when I'm left-handed and when I'm tired and when I need a ride home in the rain. Because you're trying to build something better even when people are fighting you on it. And maybe because when you look at me like you're looking at me right now, I feel like I could be brave enough for both of us. The silence that followed was the kind that felt full instead of empty. I don't know how to do this, Dae-young said quietly. The dating thing. My life hasn't exactly left room for romance. Shanice felt a smile tug at her mouth despite everything. Lucky for you. I'm a quick learner. We'll figure it out together. Just like that. Just like that. He reached out slowly, like he was afraid she might vanish, and took her hand. His palm was warm, and his fingers were shaking just slightly. I need to warn you, he said. It's going to be complicated. There will be more incidents like tonight. I can't promise you safety or normalcy, or any of the things you probably should want. Good thing I'm not normal then. Shanice squeezed his hand. But I need you to promise me something too. Anything. No more making decisions for me. No more protecting me by pushing me away. If we're doing this, we do it as partners. You tell me the truth, I make informed choices, and we figure out the complicated parts together. Dae-young was quiet for a moment, then nodded.
Deal.
Partners. Partners, Shanice agreed. And sitting there in Yoon-suk's study, holding hands with a man who was probably going to make her life infinitely more complicated, Shanice felt something click into place. Like a word in a dying dialect finally finding its perfect translation. Dating Yoon Dae-young turned out to be extremely weird and surprisingly normal at the same time. The weird parts were obvious. The security detail that followed them whenever they left the house. The fact that going out to dinner meant being escorted to private rooms where the owner would personally come check that everything was perfect. The way strangers on the street sometimes recognized Dae-young and quickly looked away. But the normal parts were what surprised Shanice. Dae-young was, beneath all the intensity and the dangerous job and the tailored suits, kind of a nerd. He loved old movies, the kind with subtitles and black and white cinematography. He could spend an hour talking about the proper way to brew tea. He had strong opinions about fountain pens. This is the best one, he'd insisted, showing her his collection during one of their evenings at his apartment. German-made, perfect weight distribution. You have 12 fountain pens, Shanice had pointed out. 13. This one's Italian. It was adorable and dorky and completely at odds with his whole crime boss image. Their first official date was to a Korean cultural center where they were showing a documentary about regional dialects. Dae-young had found it specifically for her, and watching him watch her get excited about linguistic preservation techniques was possibly the sweetest thing anyone had ever done for her. You're staring, she'd whispered during a section about JEOLLA province. You're beautiful when you're passionate about something, he'd whispered back, and Shanice had nearly choked on her popcorn. Yoon-suk, predictably, was thrilled. Finally, she'd said when Dae-young officially told her they were together. I thought I'd have to lock you both in a room. Iamianum, please.
What?
I'm old. I'm allowed to be blunt. Shanice, dear, thank you for making my son act like a human being instead of a robot. I don't act like a robot, Dae-young had protested. Both Shanice and Yoon-suk had given him identical looks. Maybe sometimes, he'd conceded. But things got complicated again 3 weeks into their relationship. Shanice was at the house working with Yoon-suk when Dae-young came in looking like he'd swallow glass. We need to talk, he said quietly. Both of you. Yoon-suk set down her tea. What happened? The Hwang family is pushing back harder than expected. They've made threats. Specific ones. He looked at Shanice. They know about you. Shanice's stomach dropped. What kind of threats? The kind where I need you to stay somewhere safe for a few days while we handle this. My apartment building has security. You'd have a panic room, guards, everything you need. Absolutely not, Shanice said immediately. Dae-young blinked. I'm sorry. I'm not hiding in a panic room because someone made threats. That's ridiculous. Shanice, these aren't empty threats. The Hwang family doesn't bluff. Then deal with them. But don't ask me to lock myself away like I'm the problem. You're not the problem. You're the person I'm trying to protect. By treating me like I'm helpless? No thanks. Yoon-suk cleared her throat. Perhaps there's a middle ground here. Shanice, dear, would you be comfortable staying at the main house for a few days? We have security here, and you could continue working with me. Dae-young, would that ease your mind? Dae-young looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his mother's expression stopped him. I'd feel better if you were here, where I can keep an eye on things, yes. Fine, Shanice agreed. But I'm not stopping my normal life. I'm not letting these people dictate what I can and can't do. Just for a few days, Dae-young said. Until we resolve this. The resolution came faster than expected, but not in the way anyone anticipated. Shanice was in the garden 2 days later, taking a break from transcription work, when she heard voices from the other side of the hedge. Male voices. Speaking Korean. Too risky. The son's already on edge about the girl. That's exactly why we do it now. Send a message. They can't go legitimate and expect no consequences. Shanice froze. These weren't Dae-young's people. The accent was different, the tone was wrong. She pulled out her phone slowly, grateful she'd kept Dae-young on speed dial. He answered immediately. What's wrong? There are men in the garden, she whispered. Speaking Korean. I don't think they're supposed to be here. Where exactly are you? East Garden. Near the fountain. Get to the house.
Now.
Don't argue, just move. Shanice started backing toward the house, phone still pressed to her ear. The voices were getting louder, like the men were moving. She made it approximately 10 feet before one of them rounded the hedge and spotted her. Hey, he shouted. Shanice ran. She'd never been much of an athlete, but fear did wonderful things for speed. She could hear footsteps behind her, could hear Dae-young yelling through the phone, could see the house getting closer. A hand grabbed her arm. Shanice did the only thing she could think of and swung her phone as hard as she could into her attacker's face. He yelped and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench free and keep running. She hit the back door at full speed, burst through it, and nearly collided with Dae-young. He steadied her with one hand while already moving past her toward the door with the other. How many? 2, I think. But Dae-young was already outside, followed by 4 of his security people who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Yoon-suk appeared at Shanice's side.
Come.
Let's get you somewhere safe. What's going to happen? My son is going to have a conversation with some very foolish men who thought breaking into our home was a good idea. Yoon-suk guided her toward the study. He won't hurt them if that's what you're worried about. Not seriously, but they'll definitely regret their choices. They waited in the study for 20 minutes before Dae-young returned. His knuckles were slightly red, but otherwise he looked completely composed. They're gone, he said. Hwang family scouts testing our security. They won't be back. Did you? Shanice started. I had a conversation with them about the wisdom of threatening people I care about. It was very educational for everyone involved. He knelt in front of her chair. Are you hurt? Just scared. And I think I broke my phone on one guy's face. A smile flickered across Dae-young's expression. That's my girl. Remind me never to underestimate you. I've been telling you that for weeks. I'm learning. He took her hands. I'm also learning that maybe you're tougher than I give you credit for. And that trying to protect you by keeping you away from my life is both impossible and probably insulting. Probably. Definitely insulting, he corrected.
I'm sorry.
You keep telling me you can handle this, and I keep not listening. Character growth, Yoon-suk said approvingly from her spot by the window. I like it. You mean privacy? This is my study. If you want privacy, go somewhere else. Dae-young sighed, but didn't move. The point is, I'm trying to do better. To trust you to make your own choices about what risks you're willing to take. Thank you, Shanice said softly. That's all I'm asking for. I know. I'm not used to having someone in my life who matters this much. It's making me act like an overprotective idiot. Little bit, Shanice agreed. But you're my overprotective idiot, so I guess I'll keep you. His expression softened in a way that made her heart do backflips. Yeah. Okay then. He stood, pulling her up with him. In that case, I have something to show you. If you're feeling up to it. What kind of something? The kind that might help you understand where I'm trying to take this family. The legitimate business I've been building. Yoon-suk smiled. Finally going to show her the center? I think it's time. What center? Shanice asked. You'll see, Dae-young said. Trust me? Shanice thought about everything that had happened in the last month. The job offer, the threats, the complicated feelings, the men in the garden. All of it was messy and dangerous and completely outside her normal life. But when she looked at Dae-young, she saw someone trying to build something better. Someone who brought her tea and collected fountain pens and looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. I trust you, she cooed. And she meant it. The center turned out to be a community facility in a neighborhood that was clearly being revitalized. New buildings mixed with old ones, murals covered formerly blank walls, and people actually smiled at each other on the street. This whole area was falling apart 5 years ago, Dae-young explained as they walked. Businesses closing, crime rising, people leaving. My family owned a lot of property here from less legitimate ventures. I started converting them. Converting them into what? He stopped in front of a modern building with large windows and a sign in Korean and English.
This.
Shanice read the sign. Korean Cultural and Community Center. Open to all. We offer language classes, Dae-young said, and she could hear pride in his voice. Korean, English as a second language, Mandarin. Cultural workshops. After-school programs for kids. Job training. It's all free or sliding scale based on what people can afford. You built this. I'm building a network of them. 3 in the city so far, 2 more planned. It's how I'm transitioning the family money, taking profits from the gray area businesses and putting them into something that actually helps people. He glanced at her. My father wouldn't have understood it, but my mother does, and my grandmother would have loved it. Shanice felt her eyes getting hot. Can we go inside? The interior was even more impressive. Bright, clean, filled with people of all ages. In one room, elderly Korean immigrants were learning to use smartphones. In another, kids were practicing taekwondo. The language classrooms had students hunched over books, and the cultural center had someone teaching traditional drumming. Dae-young. An elderly man spotted them and hurried over. And you brought a friend. Mr. Kong, this is Shanice. Shanice, Mr. Kong teaches our advanced Korean literature class. They chatted for a few minutes, and Shanice watched Dae-young transform. Here, he wasn't the intense crime boss or the careful suitor. He was just someone who cared about his community, who knew everyone's names, who asked about people's grandchildren and remembered their stories. You're staring again, he murmured as Mr. Kong headed back to his class. You're different here. Better different or worse different? Just more yourself, maybe. Shanice squeezed his hand. I like it. He showed her the rest of the facility, introducing her to teachers and students and volunteers. Everyone clearly respected him, but it was a different kind of respect than what she'd seen from his security people. This was genuine affection. I want to show you something else, Dae-young said, leading her to a quieter wing of the building. He opened a door to reveal a small archive room. This is the preservation project I mentioned before. Shelves line the walls, filled with recorded interviews, photo albums, and documents. A large table held scanning equipment and computers. We're collecting oral histories from first-generation immigrants, he explained. Recording their stories, preserving their dialects, creating a database for future generations. It's similar to what you did in your graduate program. Shanice walked slowly around the room, running her fingers over the carefully labeled materials. Korean dialects she recognized, some she didn't. Stories about immigration, about war, about building lives from nothing. Dae-young, this is amazing. It's missing something though. He moved to stand beside her. It needs someone who actually knows what they're doing. Someone with expertise in linguistic preservation and cultural documentation. Someone who cares about keeping these stories alive. Shanice's heart started beating faster. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose, he corrected. Director of Cultural Preservation. Full salary, benefits, budget to hire assistants. You'd run this program however you think is best. Build it into something that actually matters. I already have a job working with your mother, which you could continue doing if you wanted. This would be in addition or instead, whatever makes sense. The point is... He turned to face her fully. The point is that I'm not just trying to transition my family's business. I'm trying to build something that honors where we came from while creating something better for the future. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather have as part of that than you. Shanice had to sit down. The chair wobbled slightly under her, but she barely noticed. This is too much. The job, the responsibility. Is it though? Or is it exactly what you've been training for? My degree is in linguistics, not program management. So, hire a program manager. You focus on the preservation work. I trust you to build a team that can handle the rest. He knelt in front of her chair again, which was apparently becoming his signature move. Shanice, I'm not offering this because we're together. I'm offering because you're the most qualified person I know for this work. Because you care about it in a way that can't be faked. And because I think you could build something here that would outlast both of us. What if we break up? Then you still have the job. I'd put it in writing. The position exists regardless of our relationship status. You've really thought this through. I've thought about very little else for the past 2 weeks, he admitted. Well, that and whether it's too soon to tell you that I'm completely in love with you, but I figured the job offer should probably come first. Shanice's brain short-circuited. I'm sorry, what? Dae-young had the grace to look embarrassed. Too soon? You can't drop a job offer and a love confession in the same conversation. That's not fair. Would it help if I took one of them back?
No.
Shanice grabbed his collar, pulling him closer. Don't you dare take either of them back. So, is that a yes to the job or a yes to the feelings or… Both, you impossible man. Yes to both. His smile could have lit up the entire city. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shanice felt her own smile matching his. I love you too, by the way. Since apparently we're just throwing that out there now. I was trying to be romantic. You were trying to give me a heart attack. Can it be both? Shanice laughed and kissed him. So, we're doing this, Dae-young said when they pulled apart. The job, the relationship, the whole complicated mess. The whole complicated mess, Shanice agreed. Partners, remember? Partners. They sealed it with another kiss, longer this time, in an archive room filled with stories of people who'd built lives from nothing, and Shanice thought maybe she was finally writing her own story worth preserving. The next few months were a whirlwind. Shanice took the job and threw herself into it with everything she had. She hired 2 assistants, set up a proper cataloging system, and started reaching out to immigrant communities across the city. The oral history project grew from a handful of interviews to dozens, then hundreds. Yoon-suk's memoir project continued too, now with the understanding that it would become part of the center's permanent collection. The old woman was delighted. My story, preserved forever, she'd said, touching the manuscript pages. And it's all because a waitress knew my mother's dialect. Sometimes the universe has good timing, Shanice had replied. But not everything was smooth. The Hwang family situation escalated before it resolved, leading to a tense month where Dae-young barely slept and Shanice learned to recognize the signs of a real threat versus normal business tension. There were nights when he'd come home exhausted and just hold her, not saying anything, and she'd learned that sometimes silence was its own kind of communication. The resolution, when it came, was unexpected. The Hwang family patriarch requested a meeting. Formal. Neutral territory. Just him and Dae-young. I'm coming with you, Shanice had said immediately. Absolutely not. We've had this argument. I thought we agreed you weren't going to make decisions for me. Dae-young had looked pained. This is different. This is actually dangerous. Then bring extra security. But I'm not sitting at home wondering if you're okay. She'd softened her voice. Please, let me be there. He'd argued for another 10 minutes before giving in. The meeting took place in a restaurant that had been cleared of all other customers. Shanice sat slightly behind Dae-young, trying to look confident while her heart hammered. The Hwang patriarch was an elderly man who looked like someone's grandfather, which somehow made him more intimidating rather than less. You brought your woman, he observed in Korean. I brought my partner, Dae-young corrected. She has a right to be here, since your family threatened her. Apologies for that. My nephew gets overzealous. The old man studied Shanice. You're the one who speaks JEOLLA dialect. Yes, sir. Shanice replied in the same dialect. His eyebrows rose. Impressive. My wife was from that region. Died 10 years ago. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't come here to fight Yoon Dae-young. I came to propose a truce. What kind of truce? The kind where we acknowledge that your community centers are actually good for business. Property values rise, crime drops, people have better opportunities. It benefits everyone. He smiled slightly. Also, my granddaughter wants to take your Korean language classes, and my wife told me from beyond the grave that if I keep her from learning about her heritage, she'll haunt me forever. Dae-young blinked. You're calling off the rivalry because of language classes? I'm calling off the rivalry because I'm old and tired, and your mother made an excellent point at the charity dinner last week. My mother talked to you? She told me that fighting over scraps of territory while our culture disappeared was the stupidest thing she'd ever seen two Korean families do. Then she invited me to lunch and spent 3 hours lecturing me about responsibility to the next generation. He chuckled. Your mother is terrifying. I'm aware, Dae-young said dryly. They hammered out details for another hour, establishing boundaries and agreeing to cooperate on the community center initiative. By the end, Shanice's head was spinning from trying to follow the mix of Korean and English and implied meanings. One more thing, the old man said as they were leaving. He looked at Shanice. Would you consider teaching a workshop on dialect preservation? My granddaughter is interested in linguistics. I think she'd benefit from meeting someone like you. Yes, of course, Shanice managed. Good. I'll have my assistant contact you. He nodded to both of them. Yoon Dae-young. You're building something worthwhile. Don't let the old ways drag you down. In the car afterward, Shanice finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Did that really just happen? My mother, Dae-young said wonderingly, ended a 2-year rivalry over lunch. Your mother is a force of nature. She really is. He took Shanice's hand. Thank you for being there. I know I tried to stop you, but having you there made it easier somehow. Partners, Shanice reminded him. Partners, he agreed. 6 months after Shanice first walked into that private dining room and spoke JEOLLA dialect to a grieving mother, she stood in the grand ballroom of Yoon-suk's house and tried not to panic. Stop fidgeting, Yoon-suk said, adjusting the hanbok Shanice was wearing. You look beautiful. I look like I'm playing dress-up. You look like a woman honoring my culture at my birthday celebration. There's a difference. The party was Yoon-suk's 76th birthday, and apparently that meant inviting approximately 200 people to celebrate. Shanice had met maybe 30 of them. The rest were business associates, community members, friends, and family members flying in from Korea. What if I say something wrong? Shanice worried. Then you say something wrong. Nobody's perfect, dear. Stop expecting yourself to be. Dae-young appeared at Shanice's elbow. You're panicking. I'm not panicking. You're definitely panicking. I can tell because you only use that tone when you're convinced disaster is imminent. There are 200 people about to judge whether I'm good enough for this family. Nobody's judging anything. They're here to eat free food and celebrate my mother. He took her hand. And even if they were judging, my mother adores you. I'm completely in love with you, and that's the only opinion that matters. You're oversimplifying. I'm being honest. He squeezed her hand. Besides, half these people are terrified of you anyway.
What?
Why? Because you run the cultural preservation program that's been documenting every embarrassing story their grandparents want to share. You have more dirt on these families than any criminal investigation could dream of collecting. Shanice hadn't thought about it that way. Huh. So, if anyone gives you trouble, just smile and mention you recently interviewed their grandmother. Watch them panic. She laughed despite her nerves. You're terrible.
I am practical.
There's a difference. The party started and Shanice quickly discovered that Dae-young was right. People were friendly, welcoming, curious about her work. The community center had apparently made a significant impact, and everyone wanted to share their appreciation. My daughter loves her Korean class, one woman said. She's teaching me words I forgot. My father recorded his war stories with your program, another man told her. We finally know what he went through. Thank you. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Midway through the evening, Yoon-suk called for everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me. 76 years is a good long time to be alive, and I'm grateful for every person in this room who's made it worthwhile. She spoke for a few minutes about family, about community, about the importance of remembering where you came from while building towards something better. Then she switched to JEOLLA dialect, which made several of the older guests straighten up in surprise. There's someone here tonight who gave me a gift I didn't know I needed, Yoon-suk said. 6 months ago, a young woman spoke to me in my mother's voice. The exact words, the exact sounds that I thought I'd lost forever. She reminded me that our language, our culture, our stories matter, that they're worth preserving and protecting. Shanice felt her face heating up as people turned to look at her. Shanice Washington came into our lives by accident and stayed by choice. She's building something at our community center that will outlast all of us. She's making sure that voices like my mother's, like all of our mothers and fathers and grandparents, don't disappear into silence. Yoon-suk smiled. And she's made my son happier than I've seen him in 10 years, which as a mother is possibly the best gift of all. Dae-young groaned quietly beside Shanice. She promised she wouldn't mention us. She lied, Shanice whispered back, but she was smiling. So please join me in thanking Shanice, Yoon-suk finished. For her work, for her heart, and for being exactly the right person at exactly the right time. The applause was generous and genuine, and Shanice had to blink back tears. Later, when the party had wound down and only close family remained, Shanice found herself in the garden with Dae-young. The same garden where she'd run from intruders 6 months ago, though it felt like a lifetime. Your mother's getting sentimental in her old age, Shanice teased. She's always been sentimental. She just hides it better than most people. He pulled something from his pocket. A small box. Speaking of sentimental. Shanice's heart stopped. Dae-young. Relax, it's not that kind of box. We've only been together 6 months. I'm not completely crazy. He opened it to reveal a delicate bracelet. But I wanted to give you something. To mark the occasion. The bracelet was beautiful, silver with small charms attached. Shanice looked closer and realized each charm represented something from their relationship. A tiny book for the memoir project. A fountain pen. A teacup. A microphone for the oral histories. Dae-young, this is too much? Not enough? I wasn't sure what was appropriate. It's perfect. She let him fasten it around her wrist. Thank you. Thank you, he corrected. For taking a chance on my mother's crazy job offer. For not running away when you found out what my family really was. For building something beautiful out of our complicated mess. Partners, Shanice said softly. Partners, he agreed. For as long as you'll have me. Shanice looked at the bracelet, at the garden, at the man who'd somehow become her entire future without her quite noticing when it happened. She thought about the linguistics degree everyone said was useless, about the restaurant job that led to the weirdest opportunity of her life, about how sometimes the universe had a plan even when you couldn't see it. I'm thinking, she said slowly. That might be a pretty long time. Yeah. He kissed her while party sounds drifted from the house and the future stretched out bright and uncertain and absolutely worth fighting for. 3 years later, Shanice would publish her first book on dialect preservation. 5 years later, the community center network would expand to 12 locations across 3 states. 7 years later, she'd defend her dissertation and finally get that PhD everyone said she should have pursued. And 10 years later, she'd stand in another garden wearing a different hanbok, marrying the man who'd first noticed she was left-handed and decided she was worth knowing. But that night, in Yoon-suk's garden with a bracelet on her wrist and her partner's hand in hers, Shanice was exactly where she needed to be. Building something beautiful from the broken pieces, preserving voices that deserve to be heard, and proving that sometimes the most valuable things come from the most unexpected places. All because she'd learned JEOLLA dialect from a research partner who'd gone home to Gwangju and decided that preserving dying languages was worth her whole heart. The universe really did have weird timing sometimes, but maybe, just maybe, that weird timing was actually perfect all along. So yeah, that's how a waitress with a linguistics degree ended up running a cultural preservation program, dating a reformed crime boss, and making an old woman smile by speaking her dead mother's dialect. Sometimes life doesn't make sense until you look back at it, and even then it's messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. 2 years into their relationship, Shanice discovered something that changed everything, and it started with a phone call she wasn't supposed to overhear. She was at the main house cataloging some new oral history recordings when voices drifted from Yoon-suk's private office. The door was slightly open, and Shanice wouldn't have paid attention except she heard her own name. Shanice doesn't know? A woman's voice, unfamiliar, speaking Korean. No, and we're keeping it that way, Yoon-suk replied firmly. She has enough to deal with without adding this complication. But she deserves to know the truth about why you really hired her. About the connection. There is no connection. It's coincidence, nothing more. Shanice's stomach dropped. She backed away from the door quietly, her mind racing. What connection? What truth? That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Dae-young noticed immediately over dinner. You're somewhere else tonight, he observed. Just tired. Shanice lied and hated herself for it. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being kept from her. So she did what any linguistics researcher would do. She started investigating. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mr. Kong, the literature teacher at the community center, mentioned something casually during one of their conversations. It's wonderful how things come full circle, he said. Your research partner Yoonji, her grandmother, and Mrs. Yoon were childhood friends back in JEOLLA province. Such a small world. Shanice felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What did you say? Oh, I thought you knew. Yoonji's grandmother, Mrs. Park, and Mrs. Yoon grew up in the same village. They were like sisters before the war separated them. Shanice's hands went numb. Yoonji, her research partner who taught her JEOLLA dialect, whose grandmother had been Yoon-suk's childhood friend. That wasn't coincidence. That was impossible odds. She went straight to Yoon-suk's house, bypassing Dae-young's texts, asking where she was. The old woman was in her study, and her face fell the moment she saw Shanice's expression. You found out, Yoon-suk said quietly. Were you ever going to tell me? Shanice's voice shook. That you knew exactly who I was from the moment I spoke? That this whole thing was planned? It wasn't planned, child.
Sit down.
Please. Let me explain. Shanice sat, but her jaw was tight. Yoon-suk took a deep breath. Yoonji's grandmother, Mrs. Park Soo-young, was my dearest friend growing up. We were inseparable until the war scattered our families. I came to America. She stayed in Korea. We lost touch for decades.
She paused.
3 years ago, I hired a private investigator to find her. I learned she'd passed away, but her granddaughter was studying in America, a linguistics student specializing in dialect preservation. Yoonji, Shanice whispered. I wanted to reach out, to connect with the last piece of my old friend.
But I didn't know how. What would I say?
Then one day, you walked into that restaurant and spoke with Soo-young's exact voice. The same words, the same inflection. It was like hearing my childhood come back to life. So you hired me because of Yoonji's grandmother? I hired you because you had a gift that needed nurturing, Yoon-suk corrected. Because you cared about preserving what others would let die. Yes, the connection to Soo-young made me notice you. But everything after, the job, the project, the community center, that was all you. Your talent. Your dedication. Shanice felt tears burning her eyes. Does Dae-young know?
No.
I never told him about the connection because it didn't matter. You and he, that happened organically. I had nothing to do with it. But you manipulated me into this family. I gave you an opportunity you deserved, Yoon-suk said firmly. And you took it and built something magnificent. Would you have rather I said nothing? Let you keep serving water while your degree collected dust. Shanice wanted to be angry, but the logic was sound, and that made it worse somehow. I thought this was all real. That it happened naturally. It was real. It is real. The connection to Soo-young opened a door, but you're the one who walked through it and made it home. They sat in silence for a long moment. I need time to process this, Shanice finally said. Take all the time you need. Just don't let my old woman's meddling destroy what you and Dae-young have built. He loves you for you, not because of some 70-year-old friendship between two girls in Korea. Shanice left without promising anything. Dae-young was waiting at her apartment when she got home. My mother called. She told me everything. Of course she did. Are you okay? I don't know, Shanice admitted. I feel like everything I thought was real was actually orchestrated. Was it though? Dae-young leaned against her kitchen counter. Did my mother make me notice how smart you were? How kind? How you lit up when you talked about language preservation. Did she script our conversations or engineer my feelings? No, but she gave you a job offer. That's it. Everything else, that was us. You and me, figuring things out, making choices. He moved closer. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because of some connection to my mother's childhood friend that I didn't even know existed until 20 minutes ago. It just feels manipulative. My mother is manipulative, Daeyoung agreed. She manipulates everything and everyone because that's how she survived and built a life here. But this was her trying to do something good. Trying to connect with her past while giving someone deserving a chance at a future. Shanice sank onto her couch. Why does everything in this family have to be so complicated? Because nothing worth having is simple. He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. Take whatever time you need to process this. But don't throw away something real because the beginning had some orchestration behind it. What if there are more secrets? Then we deal with them together. Partners, remember? Shanice looked at him, at this man who'd become her entire world without her permission, and felt something settle in her chest. Okay, we deal with it together. Yeah. But your mother and I are having a serious talk about boundaries. Daeyoung smiled. I'd pay money to watch that conversation. The talk with Yoon-suk happened the next day, and it was intense and emotional, and ended with both of them crying and hugging and agreeing to be more honest going forward. But something good came from it too. I have something for you, Yoon-suk said, pulling out an old photo album. From Soo-young's granddaughter. Yoonji sent it after I finally reached out to her last month. Inside were photographs spanning decades. 2 young girls in traditional dress, grinning at the camera. The same girls as teenagers. Wedding photos. Baby photos. And letters. Dozens of letters written in careful Korean script. Soo-young kept every letter I sent her after we reconnected in the 1980s, Yoon-suk said softly. And I kept every one of hers. Yoonji thought you might want them for the preservation project. The dialects, the historical context. Shanice ran her fingers over the aged paper. This is incredible. There's more. Yoonji wants to visit. She's thinking about moving back to America, and she asked if there might be a position at the community center. You're kidding. She has her PhD now. Specializes in immigrant oral histories. I told her you were the director, and the decision was yours, not mine. Shanice looked at the photos, at the evidence of a friendship that had survived war and distance and decades of separation. At proof that sometimes connections ran deeper than anyone realized. Tell her to send her CV, Shanice said. I can't promise anything, but we're actually expanding the program and could use someone with her expertise. Yoon-suk's smile was radiant. Soo-young would have loved this. Her granddaughter and her best friend's family, working together to preserve what we almost lost. Life's weird like that, Shanice agreed. 3 months later, Yoonji arrived in America for her interview. The reunion was emotional and strange and wonderful all at once. I can't believe you learned JEOLLA dialect from me and ended up here, Yoonji said over coffee. The odds are astronomical. Your grandmother would probably say it was fate, Shanice replied. She definitely would. She was big on fate and destiny and things happening for a reason. Yoonji paused. I'm glad it happened though. This project you've built, it's everything we dreamed about in grad school, but actually real. Want to help make it bigger? That's why I'm here. They hired Yoonji as the Associate Director of Oral Histories, and within 6 months the program had doubled in size. They brought on 3 more researchers, established partnerships with universities, and started a digital archive that would ensure the recordings lasted forever. But the biggest surprise came a year later, when Shanice was going through some old recordings for a grant application and stumbled across something impossible. One of their earliest interviews, recorded before Shanice even officially took the job, featured an elderly man talking about his immigration experience. The interviewer's notes said he'd walked in off the street, shared his story for 2 hours, then left without giving contact information. Shanice had heard the recording before but never paid close attention to the content. This time, something made her listen carefully. The man described arriving in America in the 1970s, working odd jobs, eventually building a small business. He talked about his family back in Korea, about letters from his sister, who'd married an American soldier. And then he mentioned her name, Mrs. Yoon-suk, his sister, who'd helped him establish himself in America with a loan he'd never been able to repay before losing contact. Shanice's hands shook as she checked the recording date. 3 months before she'd met Yoon-suk. Before any of this started, she found Yoon-suk in the garden, tending her roses. "You have a brother," Shanice said without preamble. Yoon-suk's hands stilled. "Had. He died 20 years ago. Or so I thought." Recording 773. Anonymous interview from 3 years ago. "He's alive, and he came to the community center looking for you." The color drained from Yoon-suk's face. "That's not possible." "It's his voice. He describes details only your brother would know. The loan, the letters, everything." Yoon-suk sat down hard on the garden bench. "I searched for him for decades." The investigator said he died in 1998. The investigator was wrong. Shanice pulled out her phone. "I did some digging. There was a clerical error, identity confusion with someone with the same name. Your brother, Yoon Tae-sung, lives in Queens. He owns a small grocery store. He never stopped looking for you either." Why didn't he give his contact information to the interviewer? According to the notes, he got spooked when he learned the center was owned by the Yoon family. He thought you'd become too important and wouldn't want contact with the grocery store owner brother. Yoon-suk made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "That fool. That absolute fool. Wanna go meet him? Right now. Right now." The reunion between Yoon-suk and her brother was the kind of thing movies were made of. Tears, disbelief, laughter, more tears. Tae-sung was a small, weathered man who looked nothing like his sister, but had the same sharp eyes and quick wit. "You became a queen," he said in wonder, looking around Yoon-suk's house later that evening. "You became a survivor," she replied. "That's more impressive." Dae-young stood beside Shanice, watching his mother with an uncle he'd never known existed. "This is because of you," he said quietly. "Your preservation project. If you hadn't created a space where people felt safe sharing their stories, they'd have stayed lost," Shanice finished. "Yeah, I guess the project's even more important than I realized." And standing there, watching a family reunite because someone had bothered to record and preserve the stories people wanted to share, Shanice felt something click into place. This was why she'd studied linguistics. This was why dying dialects and oral histories mattered. Not just for academic purposes, but because language connected people across time and space and loss. Because sometimes the right words, spoken at the right time, could change everything. 2 years after finding Yoon-suk's brother, Shanice stood in the expanded community center watching 3 generations learn JEOLLA dialect together. Tae-sung taught the advanced class now, sharing stories that made his students laugh and cry in equal measure. Yoonji had just published their collaborative book on dialect preservation, featuring interviews from over 300 immigrants. Dae-young had successfully transitioned the entire family business to legitimate operations, and the center network had grown to 15 locations. Yoon-suk's memoir sat in the archive room, a testament to a life well-lived and a dialect that refused to die. And Shanice. Shanice had finally found her purpose, building something that would outlast all of them while proving that sometimes the most unlikely paths lead exactly where you're supposed to be. She wore the bracelet Dae-young had given her years ago, now with a few more charms added, a tiny microphone for her podcast series, a book for her publications, a small house representing the home they'd just bought together. Her linguistics degree wasn't useless after all. It had led her to a family she never expected, work that actually mattered, and love that grew from the strangest beginning into something absolutely unshakable. Every conversation recorded, every dialect preserved, every story saved was proof that caring about the things other people dismissed could change lives, including her own. Honestly, this whole journey still feels surreal when I think about it, like how one greeting in the right dialect at the right moment can reshape your entire future. If this story reminded you that your passions matter even when nobody else gets them, maybe drop a comment about what you're pursuing despite the doubters. Thanks for watching this one. Catch you in the next story.